Right, let's get started. So, good morning all, and thank you for taking the time to join us today as we discuss this update to SDI's Service Desk Analyst and Service Desk Manager Professional Standards. Speaking on the webinar today, you've got myself, Jamie Bell. I work at SDI as the Customer Success and Operations Manager. And prior to joining SDI, I'd spent many years working in the managed service provider space in various roles. Also joining me, we've got Lynne Nash and John Noctor. Lynne's a customer service expert and long-time associate of SDI as a consultant, auditor and trainer. And John's a service management consultant and also an SDI auditor and trainer too. And the three of us together have led the project to update the SDA and SDM professional standards. I just wanted to give you all a quick run through of the agenda. The webinar will probably last about 40 to 50 minutes in total, depending on kind of how many questions we get Q&A at the end. But I'll be talking a little bit about professional standards and then move on to what has changed in our industry since the update in 2016. And then Lynne and John will be talking about the new and updated content and the training courses a little bit. Following that, there'll be a quick overview of our approach to this update cycle, and then quick slide on when you can expect to be able to book new call with us. And then finally, at the end, we'll open up to any questions we've received from people attending today. And if you do have any questions, you can ask them via the webinar control panel, which will hopefully looks something like this. So you'll be able to type in your question there, choose to send it to the organisers, panelists, and send it to us. And then as we're going along, if we can answer them, otherwise we'll probably get around to them at the end once we finish going through these bits and pieces. Cool. So the Service Desk Analyst and Service Desk Manager standards have been around for over 20 years. And in those 20 years, they've been regularly updated to remain current and relevant in our ever-evolving industry. And this latest iteration of the standards will be version 8. So that's the latest version. That brings it in line with our Service Desk standard version as well, which we'll get to in a bit. But the content and training courses have always been developed by industry from all corners of the globe. And SDI are very fortunate to have a relationship with some of the best minds in the IT service. And over the years, we've tapped into these minds, create the standards as we know them, and version 8 has been no different. It's the same approach. So the courses are undertaken by IT professionals everywhere, all around the world, and the courses are supported by our examination institute, PeopleCert. And SDI made the decision to move exam administration to PeopleCert in sort of mid-2019. And you're probably aware already that PeopleCert are the exam board for ACT and the ITIL course. A bit about the standards themselves. They've always been packed with content that help provide anybody starting, cementing or furthering a career in IT or service and support with the capabilities to do just that. For example, anyone doing a Service Desk Analyst course, students can come out of those courses expecting to be able to demonstrate a great understanding of the roles and responsibilities of somebody working in a service desk environment. They should be able to develop and use the essential skills expected and required of them to succeed in their role. And they'll leave being able to understand the purpose of service desk practices and processes and how to follow them. And service desk managers, the next step up, once they've done the courses and got their qualification under their belt, they can be able to create, deliver and support strategies, service desks that are aligned to the organisation's own objectives. They'll be able to demonstrate the key leadership management competencies needed to be a successful service desk manager, and along with being able to interface the service desk into other departments across the organisation within IT as well. Okay, so what's changed in our industry since the last update in 2016? These sort of things kind of happen and help and result in what the content what content gets added to these new standards. So, you know, the most notable change of all was probably the release of ITIL 4. And that started with the ITIL Foundation book that came out early last year, but now you can actually get all of the modules which make up the managing professional designation. That was quite a big industry change. SDI also released its latest iteration of the Global Best Practice Standard for Service Desk in 2019. And that is a standard against whether organisations can have their maturity assessed. There's been a much stronger focus on mental health and well-being of staff in the workplace. And that's something that SDI are very proud of, actually included in the best practice standard that we released last year, a maturity rating against just that. There's also been a massive uptake, explosion in organisations, more modern ways of working, you know, such as methodologies, Agile and Lean, for example. Alongside that, complementing that is an increase in demand for automation and AI. We've also, you know, a big part of that is a shift in focusing on products and services to more about, you know, customer experience. And when the SDI are talking about experience, you know, if I could give you an example, if you take something like coffee, and you might say that purchasing coffee ready ground in a jar from the supermarket, that, you know, that's a product. But buying coffee in a cup from a mobile van on your way to work, you know, that can be considered a service. There's your product and service. But what do we mean by experience? Well, you've got that coffee and it's provided to you in a mug with chocolate sprinkles. You can enjoy it while sitting on a nice leather sofa in a warm shop. Free newspaper, maybe free Wi-Fi as well. But, you know, that's kind of what we mean by experience. Everything else that goes with it to ensure that. But as I go through all of these things, they've all had an impact on the content created by SDI, and the service analysts and service managers are no different. Right, so I'm going to open the discussion up now with John and Lynne too, as the two lead content contributors and architects of these new standards. As we're talking, please do feel free to ask any questions, as I said. And if we can't get to them during this bit, we'll round them up at the end and then put them to John, Lynne, and myself. Okay, so John and Lynne, are you both there?
Yeah, online.
Cool.
Yeah, online.
Right, so you know, in terms of the new standards, and one of the things I didn't mention in the changes in our industry, if you like, is everyone with coronavirus. But you know, do the new standards include topics on handling and coping with situations like we find ourselves in at the moment? That could go to either.
Sorry, jumping in there. I think, to be honest, essentially they always have done. Well, we've never been able to predict something like the situation we've been in for the past few months. The basics of what we teach and have always been the core of these standards has actually been all the basics that we need to be even better at now we're in the situation we're in. So I think the new standards kind of reinforce everything that's always been there. So, you know, flexibility, adaptability, teamwork, effective communication. And these are more important than ever in the current ways of working. And I think what's really interesting, things that we've known in the service desk world and been teaching through these standards for many years, other parts of IT are now coming to service desks to see how to adapt to the current situation, because it's something we've been doing for a long time. I think, you know, a refresh of processes, which these standards deliver, you know, the alignment will ITIL 4, but in always rewriting these standards, we go on what's practical, what's going to work, how are roles and responsibilities with regards to processes changing. And of course, the current situation has tested our processes like never before. Yeah, and it presented this opportunity to make them as efficient and flexible as possible while still being able to guarantee the outcomes. I think our resources have been tested exceptionally. Organizations that kind of like didn't really see the point in doing the continuity testing, specifically for the service desk, now realize the importance of it. And those that, having worked to our standards for many years, were better prepared. But it's been a test, and it delayed the release of these standards a little bit because of the situation, but it's given us a chance to test the new standards, not in practice, but look at them and go, will they help now? Are they in line with what people need to be doing now? And personally, I think they are. And I think one of the things that surprised me through this COVID response that everybody's had to go through is the fact that it's not just raised the service desk's profile to the customer base and to the business, but it's also raised their profile internally. So now more than ever is a great time to be capitalizing on that with a good, strong set of service desk certification standards, and now the service desk manager and service desk analyst, which is how we put them into practice.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think it's an area that we've always focused on, certainly as trainers and consultants, and the standards have always focused on flexible working and collaboration. I think what we've seen this year is that need to have an instant acceleration in terms of having some of these capabilities in place, and I think the standards have never been more relevant than this strange world that we find ourselves in. I was chatting to a colleague a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about that COVID-19 has been the biggest driver for active collaboration for IT teams and to the business, and for digital transformation. I think the biggest challenge has been just that need to get so much in place within a short period of time, and certainly just aligning with Lynne there, that the customers that I've chatted to that have been through SDA, SDM, the standards, I think they were maybe more enabled and ready for that instant transformation. So it's nice to see that benefit's been in place, but now we've got a much tighter focus on it in the new standards.
It's interesting, John, that you said there about accelerator, and it just goes to show that now one of the important things is service desks and support operations, IT departments as a whole, have to have more than one gear. And I think having good, strong models that the standards give us allow us to have more than one gear.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting one that maybe just alongside what we're talking about here, but this year I've started to hear that the businesses are feeling the love for their IT departments, in that I think they've really appreciated that IT providers have a lot of capabilities, they care, they're passionate about what they do, and to keep business continuity in place, because that's what we looked at in March through April. I think we're finally seeing IT departments who have got these capabilities, who have got this focus, and have gone through that collaboration and transformation, starting to see the appreciation from their customer base.
What do you guys think about kind of like what's included in the standards around, it ties in with this around kind of resilience and that stress management piece as well, because we did a lot around that, certainly for service management.
I think talk about timeliness. Again, in remote working situation that we're in now, where managers aren't in there with their teams, they've had to certainly work harder, and they realize, how much they rely on being with their teams to pick up on the subtleties of how the team is working as individuals, as well as a cohesive unit. So I think it's really, really timely that in all of the standards, we've now created this focus on mental health and emotional well-being. In response to what we've seen coming in the industry, so it's good that, we've always had that in there in some form, usually in the form of the stress management, because we all understand how stressful and unpredictable the service desk and support environment can be. But it's nice now for that to be being recognised and to flesh it out, so that we can actually look, particularly through not just in the standards, but through the training, that we can actually start to help people focus on these things and, you know, give them the courage to use the resources that are available to them. I think it's really timely.
Yeah, I completely agree, you know, and certainly we concentrate on that in the sort of leadership and management area, that there is never before have we seen more of a need for leaders and any staff really, for their colleagues to understand their physical, emotional and mental well-being of all their staff and all their stakeholders, because I think we're all in this together, and certainly that the standards now have a lot of clarity around that area, a lot of ideas, some options for approaches, and I think that it's going to be quite critical as we keep on with this, whatever this new normal looks like, that focus continues, and especially with understanding that we've got to understand how technology now supports that physical, mental and emotional well-being, because we have that natural distance between resources.
I also think, because we've got certainly for the managers, you kind of in the new standards that have been aligned with the service desk specification standards, that strengthening of the importance of the employee experience, if you like. We talk a lot about the customer experience, but you know, we've got to talk about the employee experience as well. When we start talking about employee experience instead of just employee satisfaction, then that's where we can start to bring in the health and well-being stuff into what we already know is important, that if you look after your staff, they're able to look after your customers.
Yeah, I think it's key. You know, there's this phrase, put your customers first. Well, if you don't put your staff first, they will never put your customers first. And I think it's now everybody's duty, a duty of care, to look out for the well-being of staff, to make sure that that we're conscious of specific challenges, general challenges, uncertainty in the world. Nobody could have predicted what we've been through in the last 6 months, but certainly I think the standards have always had that focus. And once again, as we've said, Lynne, I think now we've just worked to make sure that that's clearly communicated through both the SDA and the SDM.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Okay, so yeah, we touched on this a bit, but how much of an influence do you think the release of ITIL 4 has had on the new standards? Probably one for you, John, initially.
Yeah, I don't think it's a surprise that I'll probably take the lead on that one. I think we have to be, I remember myself and Lynne talking about this, or all of us, Jamie, when we started down this path, is that we need to be clear that the SDA, the SDM are not ITIL courses.
Yeah.
You know, that is a framework in its own right, but there is obviously both SDA, SDM, the stuff we do in the SDC, ITIL 4, they are all around best practice. So I would say ITIL has a heavy influence on what we've looked at, especially in the practices, process and procedures world, of course, because there's that natural alignment. But I would not say that ITIL 4 has driven the new standards, because our standards in terms of the service desk are much wider and much more focused on that world of the service desk. So yes, it is fair to say it's an influence, and I'll probably hold my hand up for that, because I live and breathe ITIL, as you know. So certainly an influence. Certainly we've looked at aligning to some of the new areas within ITIL 4, such as talking about release as separate but linked to deployment. You know, now we talk about change enablement, we talk about practices, but I wouldn't say we're slaves to the ITIL 4, but a lot of ITIL 4 is very, very, very good and has a natural alignment and and synergy with what we talk about in SDA and SDM. So an influence driver in certain parts, but the SDA and SDM are best practice in their own right. I probably would say it that way.
Yeah, what's quite nice for me, going back the other way, John, is that shift that ITIL had in ITIL 4 towards practices, because that's what we've been talking about for service desks for a long time, that it is a practice. Yeah, I know previously ITIL called it a function, but to me, you know, all of these things have been practice because they're things you do in practice. And I think what to make clear is in the SDA and the SDM standards, we focus on what is most relevant to service desks.
Correct.
So we're talking about what their roles within those processes might be, because of course it can vary from organisation to organisation. And it can be an eye-opener. It can be an eye-opener for a lot of service desk analysts, particularly because while they may have heard about these practices or processes, they may have even done some form of ITIL training, they've never really looked on it from that practical, making them work kind of perspective. And I think the nice thing about our standard is, you know, getting them to take ownership of their role in those responsibilities, you know, in those processes. That's something we've always been promoting. But certainly, I think by aligning the SDA and SDM to practices that ITIL defines has made that even easier for people to understand.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think it's, you know, I've always talked about what you actually have is a capability and the resources to enact one or more processes, and that's really what our practice is about. So I think it does bring us closer together. And the other thing I think to remember is if we think of why we've refreshed the SDA and SDM standard and why ITIL 4 came into being is, both of us, I think, needed to recognise the modern, digitally transformed, digitally enabled world that we live in. You know, to address more around cloud, agile, the things, Jamie, you were talking about earlier. You know, AI, chatbots, more flexible, more high velocity ways in some ways of working. So both our standard and the ITIL 4 framework, I think, have actually evolved for the same reasons. So there's that natural synergy between them.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so we talked a lot about the ITIL 4 and the release of that, but you think the SDA, SDM, SDC, if organisations aren't ITIL aligned or haven't sort of embarked on looking at the ITIL framework, do you think they're still relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I mentioned this in the blog I wrote. I think whether you're ITIL aligned or not, you still want to be an effective service provider, focusing on quality, focusing on that customer experience, focusing on doing the right thing the right way consistently. So it's not a prerequisite that you're ITIL aligned. If you're a service provider, you've got customers, you have relationships with those customers, you want the experience to be great. They'll phone you with requests, they'll contact you with requests, they'll talk to you about incidents with the service you provide. You'll naturally evolve and change what you want to do. And yes, within the ITIL world, we put specific namings to these areas, to these practices. But if you're not ITIL aligned, and many of the people that we audit, or some of the people we audit, aren't ITIL aligned. They like bits of it, they might not like any of it, they might like all of it, but all of them, and that's the beauty of our standard being sort of independent in a way, although heavily linked with certain other standards and frameworks. That's the beauty, that the value is there no matter what type of operating principles that you have.
I also think agree with everything you just said there. And I think one of the beauties of the SDA and the SDM standards is that they are accompanied by courses where we have that ability to translate our standards into other frameworks. So, you know, we can talk, people come on those courses and they talk about how they work in their organization, and we can translate it. You know, I've done it for I've actually had someone who worked in facilities management, you know, who was their service desk manager, completely different part, you know, nothing to do with IT, but they came on the service desk managers course because essentially it's about managing a service or support operation. And we were able to easily translate through, you know, getting them to talk about what they do and their terminology. We were easy to make that translation for them. So, you know, if we can teach these standards and they're of benefit outside of the IT world, then it just shows they're flexible enough for us to translate them into any other model that's out there.
Yeah, I think that's true, and also remember what we talk about and what we espouse is best practice. So that's one of the beauties of the way that we work is, yes, you know, we can look at a lot of what ITIL says, but we can also look at other standards, other ways of working. That means that we can just have a sort of transcend, if you like, all of these frameworks and standards. So we position best practice into what's beneficial and targeted to our world of service desk and wider IT support. So I think, you know, getting back to that question, the standard is for everybody, no matter where your alignment is, whether you're an ITIL house, whether you've gone down, you know, another type of standard route, or you've even evolved best practice within your own world. What we talk about is relevant, it's common sense, but it's focused on the service desk and IT support. It's not focused on you going to the next level of ITIL.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, in the blogs you've both contributed to and written for the SDI website about these standards, you talk about it also being, you know, particularly the SDM being closer aligned to SDI's best practice standard for service desks. Are you able to kind of give that a bit more context?
So shall I start with that one, John?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we started looking at the service desk manager standards, particularly, one of the very first conversations we had is, why is it not more closely aligned to the service desk certification standards? Because if that standard is for the service desk operation as a whole, then, you know, surely we can make things easier for service desk managers who want to go down that route if we align their standards. But you could have just basically said that a lot of the service desk certification standards could have become the SDM standards if we wanted to go that particular route. I think we've managed to strike a good balance. We've kind of mirrored the structure. So we're talking in the same way about leadership, policy and strategy. We're talking about people management, and as we said, employee health and well-being, employee satisfaction, all those kind of things. We're talking about resources. We're talking about processes and procedures. We're talking about quality assurance and what we measure. And so, you know, this is all things, and to be honest, not just a service desk manager. You could take anyone who manages a team and you could translate these standards for almost anywhere. But I think we're talking about the same things. We're talking about the SDC being a model to measure the service desk and support operation as a whole. Well, we've got to help managers align with that best practice. To some extent, I think it always did. We just hadn't structured it in such a way that it was easy for people to understand the synergies between the two. And that's where we've gone. And that's doing that has thrown up some interesting things that we've not thought before about including for managers. But by looking at it, looking for that synergy, it provided us some extra topics, which has been really interesting to go through.
Yeah, I agree. I remember that conversation as well. Just, you know, is it almost a lift and shift of the SDC? And whilst we needed to have that closer alignment, just for that consistency, I think we recognised that the SDA and the SDM had that educational component, that learning component. So it wouldn't have been relevant or quite the right thing to do just to literally take the SDC as it is and make it into an SDA SDM. That wouldn't have worked, because we really want to instill some of the competencies, some of the ideas that work well within what SDC is looking for, but we had to keep the educational component to it and the learning and development component. So it made sense, of course, though, for us to take especially the SDM, as Lynne said, and say, well, really, what messages are we trying to get across here? Well, actually, we've always wanted to talk about strategic alignment and development, how you are as a leader and a manager, how you develop and look after your people, what technologies and resources you need, the best practice side instead of processes, etc., and the management information, quality and experience. So when we looked at it, I think we sort of felt that everything we were training did actually align to SDC. We just needed to structure it a bit better, so it was clear to see how both integrated with each other.
I agree with that, definitely. I can remember part of the same conversation being, what does this mean for managers? And just trying to do that closer alignment allowed us to say, what does this actually mean for a service desk manager? And asking what it meant for a service desk manager allowed us to then ask, and what does that mean for a service desk analyst? So by aligning service desk manager more closely with the SDC standards, it allowed us to then do, what does it mean for the analyst? And I think that's quite a different tack. We've not really taken that tack before. We've looked at those two roles as separate things with some crossovers, but I think now, again, that closer alignment allowed us to bring SDA and SDM a little bit closer on certain topics, because obviously there's facets to a manager's job that analysts don't have. So I think it's tied everything together better, and it's allowed us to do that. Well, if this is a key skill or competency for an analyst, and the manager is leading those analysts, well, it has to be a key competency for them too. So just as we've rolled some things down from the service desk certification, we've rolled some things up from SDA.
Yeah, and I think there's a practical side to it, that people who've been through SDA and SDM, if they get involved in SDC, they can start to see all the skills, the things we've talked about in those courses, how they align, and say, actually, I've got an awful lot now to add to the SDC program, because it makes sense what they were taking me through is now what they're looking for in SDC, and vice versa. From the SDC side, when that comes into the training, you can see why we're talking about certain things in terms of a much more formal audited best practice standard. So they naturally are now two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so with a shift towards delivering more virtual training courses, and all training providers really, not just SDI, how are SDI planning to make the training more engaging for a remote audience? So I can answer that one. So for our new courses that are going to be released later on this year, we'll be distributing the courseware content digitally, as you can imagine, but in a more engaging way. So students will now benefit from having all the resources they'll need as part of the training course in an interactive environment across any device that's and students will be able to we're trying to replicate that kind of classroom experience, and students will be able to add notes freehand or input by keyboard if they prefer to do that. And all the notes that are taken are indexed with the relevant pages within the document. So and it'll allow students to open multiple tabs, pages in the same document or different documents, and it's all in a secure location. And it allows students to kind of navigate documents and student notes and itself in an interactive way. And they'll be available online or offline as well. So if you're in an area that has poor connectivity or such remotely, then that's not something that we need to worry about. Yes, I mean, in addition to that as well, the slide decks themselves are going to will be more engaging than they have been in previous versions, and they'll include more interactive content too, like videos and. But we're committed to constantly developing the delivery to provide the best possible learning experience.
I think
yeah.
that's going to be. Sorry, Jamie.
No, it's okay. Go for it.
I think that's going to be a great addition to the kind of classroom environment that we're using with Adobe Connect, because as trainers, and I'm sure John will agree, we try and make that Adobe Connect experience as much like a live classroom as we possibly can, given that we're not all present in the same room. And I think, we've got these great opportunities with Connect. We can have the presentation up there, and yes, it's going to be more engaging. We can see our class. If everybody turns their webcams on, we can see our class. We can interact in the same way as the classroom. We can have breakout rooms. We can do quizzes. We've got all of this capability in the environment that we're using. And I think having this more interactive courseware is really going to put the two things together. So I think that's going to be a great addition. And it's kind of learning from some of the education industry. And of course, we have so many members from the higher education industry. And it's good that we're kind of learning from our customers. So we don't just kind of like try and teach all of our members and our clients and our course delegates. We're learning from them too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that for me, I was thinking about this earlier, and that this year, what was a necessity because of the pandemic for everything to be virtual, I think actually what we're going to see, it's going to be a preference moving forward. I still think there'll be, whenever whatever normal looks like in the future, and whenever we get to that, there will still be on site. But I think now people have much more of an appetite to go down the virtual route. There was a lot of unknowns about what companies will do in terms of where their staff will be located. There will be a lot more home working by nature. We have global organizations where virtual makes sense. So actually, I think this has driven us and the whole education industry in terms of service providers into looking at how we can make it much more engaging. And I'm excited, the same as Lynne, for all the stuff that you're working on, Jamie, in terms of the platforms, in terms of the content, to make it ever more engaging. It's something we'll always work at. As technology evolves, we'll leverage that and take advantage of that to improve the experience.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing about SDI's training is, we've had virtual training for a long time, as well as our classroom training. We've had public courses. We do in-house training for people who want something a bit more focused on their organization's priorities. And I think having those options, virtual learning certainly makes it accessible to people who might otherwise not be able to attend a classroom.
Yeah.
And it's allowed people to take advantage of the current situation to actually get some training, where they've perhaps been furloughed or something like that. All of the online training available has helped them upgrade their skills. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be about having, a mix of options to make the training accessible to everyone.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a mindset change as well. Actually, we're moving towards a much more relaxed world. Would you believe? Especially if I'm focusing on the training side. I've been lucky because I've done virtual training for a number of years, but not too much, admittedly, because the requirement wasn't there. But what we've got to understand is that probably myself and Lynne have dedicated offices where we live, because that's where the nature of our workers, not to be to work in an office, is to to be home workers who go to different client sites. But the point I'm trying to make now is that what I think we've appreciated is that many people have had to repurpose their living space into a professional environment.
Yeah,
and I think we've
absolutely.
got to be much more understanding. When I start the courses, I say to people, listen, don't worry if a pet jumps up, if someone walks behind you, someone offers you a cup of tea, a child wants to see what on earth you're up to, we'll all give them a friendly wave. And I think it's actually, strangely enough, made the training a bit more relaxed, you know, because if you say to people, please don't worry about background noise, please don't worry about interruptions, don't worry about being offered a cup of tea, because, you know, I think we've now moved into a different way of working, and we've got to be more relaxed than maybe we were when we had a purpose-built training facility in company premises.
Thank you very much. Okay, so in what element of the standards are you both most proud of and excited to teach?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. Oh my goodness.
Do you want me to go first on this one?
Go on. If you've got something in your head, go for it, John.
Well, those of you that know me are going to expect me to say practices, processes, and procedures, and yeah, of course that's a large part of my world. So and probably the sort of bland answer would be everything, because I like it all. However, yeah, I'm looking forward to practice, process, and procedures, but because I'm quite proud of that. I had a lot of input to that part, especially. But actually, in terms of excited to teach, I'm really pleased about our focus on customer experience now. As we said, the well-being of staff and the leadership side. So I'd probably say in every area there's something I'm quite excited about. It's hard to just say specifically this, but I think I'm most excited that we're now talking about things that are very relevant to today's organizations, and that's probably what I'm most excited about.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'd agree with the customer experience stuff, but that's something that I love teaching anyway. Customer experience, the focus for managers, the focus on the employee experience through best practice in people management, through, you know, because we're going to be able to add this new dimension in this, you know, this current paradigm that we're going to be able to add dimension to that. I'm going to be intrigued to teach the leadership policy and strategy side of things. It's one of the areas I'm always interested in, but to see how that's shifted as we start teaching these new courses and we start talking about these best practice standards, to see how people connect with those in this new situation, where there is this focus on adaptability and rapid response, and, you know, even in processes and procedures saying, you know, yeah, but how do we make sure process and procedure don't slow us down? Because we've got this energy and dynamism in a lot of organizations at the minute, this just do it attitude. Yeah. And I'm going to say it's going to be interesting to see how people take that and balance it against having good structures in place to make sure that we can keep it going. Not that we're going to slow it down and hold it up, but how do we maintain and sustain that in whatever our new normal turns out to be? I think for analysts, it's going to be looking at, you know, going through all the great stuff we do about communications, conflict management, the customer experience again. It's going to be, you know, good taking them through those and then finding out from them how things are changing still.
Yeah, I agree. I think the sustainability element is going to be really exciting to teach. You know, we've been through a big transformation this year, and that transformation will evolve into next year. Obviously, always with an eye on what's happening with the global pandemic in the short term, but in the longer term, that sustainability in terms of consolidated transformation, consolidated experience. Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be an exciting thing to be a part of, teach and witness.
Yeah, there's not a part of these standards or the courses that accompany them Whereas a trainer, you ever think, oh God, we've got to do that. Yeah. Some bits, it surprises you. The groups change so much. You get some groups where they just get certain tips and then they struggle with others. It's never the same twice. Never the same twice. So it's a bit hard to pick what's going to be the most exciting to teach, because it's going to change every single course. Because you get some groups, you know, and you get to the problem solving and you think, oh, this is going to be so much fun. Yeah. So I think it's the whole thing is much more, as a trainer, I think the whole set of standards are much more cohesive, they're solid, they're relevant. So I'm looking forward to teaching all of it.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks for your answers, guys. Okay. Right, so thank you for the discussion. So I just wanted to share with people attending today that, you know, kind of our approach to this update cycle of the standard. So we kicked off the project in September last year, and this is shortly after the release of the actual latest version of the best practice standard for service itself. Kind of tied in and fed in quite nicely. And in the initial stage, we you know, before we all met, we invited practitioners, consultants, trainers, and experts from all over the world, and I mean literally, like we had people contributing from New Zealand, South Africa, South America, you know, Europe, all over, and they were tasked with looking at the existing content and kind of, you know, tearing that apart, reassembling it, and kind of giving their feedback about what bits they could be good, what a bit more attention, or what things we should take out or add. We collected that feedback for about a 2-month period, and we kind of what we did was we took it and we used it to drive some core review sessions at the tail end of last year. I think it was about November, December. And this is when John, Lynne, myself, Tessa Trabwick, our CEO, and Carla Thornley from Oxford, we were all locked in a room and putting the new content together. I'm sure you guys remember that. And then, you know, once we kind of got it together, kind of draft version of what we look like, we engage with people, look at the existing structure of the exam to see what needs to change there. And it was clear at that point then, with the service desk manager content being so drastically different, the alignment to the service desk standard, and it being a lot meatier, that we'd need to look at the exam structure there for that particular model. But what we've decided with those guys is that we're going to increase the amount of questions in the SDM exam from 80 questions, from 60 questions to 80. And instead of having 60 minutes, you'll have 90 minutes. Candidates will have 90 minutes. And that's kind of a reflection of how we see the SDM now becoming a much kind of bigger and relevant and you know, training course. And so alongside all of that as well, the existing training courseware and slide deck have also been updated and refreshed, as I said earlier. And you can see where we're at now. So we, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, we published the SDM, the SDA and the SDM standard documents, and they're now on our website as a free download, the standard themselves, so you can already get to see what those courses may look like. In fact, I can share with you now when will be the first dates that the new courses will be running. So the first course that you can book with SDI for the service of analysts on a new standard, against the new standard, the new exam, and all the new updated course training materials will be the 3rd of November, and for the SDM, the 20th of October. Yeah, so I think that's the last slide. Yeah, it is. So did you have anything else you wanted to add, John and Lynne, before we've got a couple of questions from the webinar to ask you?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground, so just be, I think, probably best to answer the questions.
Yeah, I thought just one thing is, like, just to make people aware that the service desk analyst exam is still 60 questions and it's still a 1-hour exam. It's only the service desk manager one that has been expanded because need to ask you about a lot more stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think I'll probably end up thinking myself that. Okay, so first question is, what will the pass rates be for the news? Okay, yeah. So as Lynne says, the SDA exam, the amount of questions in SDA and the amount of time to do the exam hasn't changed. So the pass rate is going to be the same, and in fact, it's going to be the same for both still. Pass rate, so it's 65% for a pass, for a standard pass, which is 39 questions in SDA, and 87% for high mastery, which out of the 60 questions. And as we mentioned, with the SDM questions going to 80, the pass rate will remain the same, 65%, but you'd now have to get 52 questions correct. And the high mastery rate is still 87%, 70 or more correct questions. So it's much, it'd be a bit more of a challenge, but you know, we believe it's warranted by the kind of content. We want to test that the students they get it, that they get it. Is that a fair summation, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think so. It's that just the breadth of the service desk manager. I think, you know, we had to expand it just because the breadth of that course is so wide, and you want to make sure that you're not missing out anything important.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So the next question is so for people who have already done the SDA and the SDM qualifications, they've already got their certificates. What do the changes mean for them? Okay. Well, with all versions of previous versions of SDA and SDM, the qualifications themselves don't actually have an expiry date on them, so they're still valid. But you know, in our industry and our advice, you know, fast-paced industry with the services and technology evolving all the time, we'd suggest that, you know, those sort of certifications should be kept current. But you know, we will be creating and running a bridging course for SDM early next year, and that will be a one-day course which will include the new exam at the end of it. And you know, the course will cover the fundamental changes between the last and the new version and everything you'd need to know to get the qualification. But as we kind of alluded to, that's because SDM is a much bigger beast now, and we won't be doing the course for SDA, but yeah, it's for SDM who have already qualified want to take it. That's it. I think that's all the questions, and all of the content. Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending and attending this webinar, listening to talk about the new standards. We're very excited to get the new courses underway. So yeah, we hope to see many of you on the courses soon. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lynne.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Jamie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.